Welcome. Wednesday night, Mill Valley Zen, sometimes international. I'm in Montana again tonight. This time in a little Airbnb. Funny to be, here the rivers are all overflowing and it's raining most every day. It's the opposite of Northern California. And also, of course, just the can't help but think of the events, the gun violence and Supreme Court rulings, and which I think makes me think how just how important this practice is, and tonight's chapter from Not Always So is called "The Boss of Everything," the boss of everything, and I think it's particularly important and relevant when things are happening that we can't control, or we don't agree with, or that infuriate us, and yet what does this mean? What does this mean? This practice of being the boss of everything, and I found this chapter. I really like it a lot, and it's also quite subtle. It's subtle in a way, and it's easy. It's easy to, as he says in the beginning, it's easy to misunderstand. The boss of everything doesn't mean we control everything, not at all, but some sense of the practice of finding our own agency and our own deep kind of inner power, and how we find our own sense of agency and power when we're not controlling things, which we're certainly not. And it's funny, during tonight's sitting practice, as I was thinking a little bit about this chapter, I was reminded of two models that I really like of practice that I think are very much about finding our own deep agency, our own deep power. One is the model of the hero's journey, right? The model of the hero's journey, which is, again, I think, the language of finding our true home. But I think finding our true home is really very similar to what Suzuki Roshi is talking about here as the boss of everything, our true home, not as a place, but as a way of being, this kind of radical resilience and acceptance and coursing in the territory of difficulties, Star Wars and many other, whether it's the Odyssey, are kind of models of right in the midst of many things that happen that are extremely painful, difficult, frustrating, how we come back to finding our own power. And again, I'm often the model of the hero's journey has a real practical bent to it, especially recognizing that we start out with this sense of trying to find our deep home, and then right away, the second stage of the hero's journey is refusing the call, feeling our own sense of resistance and reluctance to letting go. But then some of the other key elements are finding support, and working through our own history with our own relationships um, with our mothers and fathers as a way of returning and finding our own sense of deep inner power. And the other model that comes from the Zen tradition is the other model of finding one's power, finding one's agency, is the 10 ox-herding pictures, which I've talked about before. But again, it reminds me, this chapter, the boss of everything. The 10 ox-herding pictures are, again, I think it's another model of grappling with finding our true home and wrestling with our ego, and this path of letting go of self and ego, which again is Shunryu Suzuki in this chapter keeps coming back to, that what he's really talking about is controlling or working through our own self, our own ego, and finding a way of being and living outside of the usual sense of self and ego. And so he starts out this chapter saying, the reason we practice meditation is to be the boss of everything, wherever we are. But if we say so, it will create a misunderstanding that you are the boss of everyone or everything. When you understand in that way, you exist as an idea in your mind. This is not what we mean. That is a delusion, because the ideas you have are not well supported by your practice, and you become enslaved by the idea of you and others. When the real power of practice is supporting your understanding, then the you who is practicing our way is the boss of everything, the boss of you, yourself. So this, I think, is, again, interesting, subtle, and kind of profound idea that it's easy to live in the delusion, in the idea of self, and that the real power of practice is somehow seeing through ourselves and going beyond ourselves, finding our real agency and power that isn't enslaved by the idea of self. And then he says that is why the Buddha said to control yourself. The self you have to control is the deluded you, not the real you. And I don't think it's so much control as much as understanding. To understand yourself, to understand our own the unreal part of us, the deluded part of us. He says you have an idea of who you are and you're caught by it. This is very kind of strong language that he's using here when he says you are enslaved by the deluded you, so you have difficulty or confusion. So this, I think, is again very, very subtle and not so subtle, this sense of in what way are we deluded, in what way are we fooled, in what way are we enslaved by our own sense of who we think we are. He says you are letting yourself be so here now he's starting to talk about the antidote to this kind of delusion and enslavement is let yourself be with everything and let things be as they want to be. This is the power of practice. So this is, I think this is really hard, right? Again, whether it's, in the political arena, to see that things are as they are, or whether it's with our children or our families or any place where we're struggling, uh, to not be caught, enslaved by our own, this the deluded self, the idea of self, and somehow to not be so caught by it, and to be able to see and live with a lot more acceptance and clarity. So he says to be one with something does not mean to be caught by it. You create something, and now he's kind of unpacking and backing up about why, how we create our own sense of delusion, how it is we are enslaved by self. He says we create something that's so interesting, that even though we've created it, we somehow are enslaved by our own idea of self. And when that's what's happening, he says you are not the boss, and you can even lose yourself. And he goes on to say real practice has a direction, but the direction is no gaining idea, finding a way to include everything that comes, And then he kind of shifts in, like, well, what does this look like? What does this look like in day-to-day practice? And he says it looks like helping others. It looks like sharing your practice with people, to helping others and sharing our practice. And then I also really like where he says, if someone asks me why I practice, I might answer that it is to have a well-oriented mind. If someone asks me why I practice, I might answer that it's to have a well-oriented mind. And he says the point is to not lose this well-oriented mind. And then he uses the example of, he says in Japan, there is a Bodhidharma toy. And I think here we have a similar toy in the United States, but it's not Bodhidharma, but it's this thing that has, something that if you push over, it keeps coming back, right? It's like it has something that has a toy that has something heavy like sand on the bottom. He says it's made of paper, and even though you push it down, it will stand back up. This is well-oriented practice. People enjoy tossing the toy around because wherever it goes, it will stand back up. And then at the end, he says, we cannot find where the self is. You think your mind is in your head, but where is it? No one knows. So our practice is to keep coming back to being with everything. Without being enslaved by it, you are able to share your practice with everything. This is how to establish yourself on yourself. You are ready to include everything. When you include everything, that is the real self. So it's interesting, right? Including the uncertainty, including not fighting with the decisions that are made and the pains and difficulties and uncertainties, but somehow having the sense of developing a well-oriented mind.